Thank you for granting me this opportunity to come and present. I am Wilber Ssebuyungo Kivekayunga. This study will be guided by the topic AI adoption for enhancing digital education space in higher education institutions. A case of selected universities in central Uganda. This study was prompted by the problem statement. The European Union and the United Nations are investing enormously in the digitization initiative. Actually, it is targeted that 80% of the states are digitized. That is according to the European Commission report of 2018. The United Nations is actually also promoting access to quality education for sustainable development. If we read their strategic development goal 4, and also this initiative is emphasizing the need for digitization of education institutions. In emphasizing this, it puts importance to the involvement of AI in the agenda. And actually in the UK, this agenda has been adopted up to 92%, where about 92% of students are using AI in their academic progress. And that was also noted by a report of Keren in 2025. When it comes to our country, Uganda, despite that 74% of the university staff are aware of the benefits of AI, according to Edith's study, which involved the universities in central Uganda, the adoption and acceptance of AI technology in Uganda's higher education institutions is still low. Although these staff are aware of the importance of AI, adopting AI in education institutions is still low at 1%. So this low adoption rate reveals an ongoing challenge in our universities, which are in our developing, as in Uganda as a developing state, and which is also a multicultural state. And therefore, when Edieru and Keren made the study, they realized that over 76% of students in universities are using AI in attempting assignments, in preparing for examinations, and even doing research. However, this is being done without being guided by a model, an AI model. So if no AI adoption model is developed for higher education institutions, students are likely to continue attempting assignments, doing examinations, and conducting research using AI, which is going to cause a dispute between their supervisors and their lecturers. And if this continues, it is going to result into questioning the integrity, and it will risk the credibility of universities. This study is underpinned by the following theories. The theory of artificial intelligence, developed by McCarthy in the 1956. McCarthy proposed this theory in his paper Artificial Intelligence for Generations, and therefore the theory asserts that there will be need for intelligent systems which employ neural networks in functioning exactly or even better than a human being, and therefore his paper was accredited to have initiated artificial intelligence concepts in the world, and that therefore the machines will perform tasks similar or exact as those of a person, and therefore machines will also be workers or employees able to perform tasks just like a person. This theory was also guided by the adaptive automation theory, which was proposed by Mark Scarborough of the 1996, which proposed that machines can produce work and operate without much involvement of the person, and therefore can produce work in an automated mode to adapt to new services and deliver services as a person would have done. The automation theory has been applied in industries and in education institutions, automating education to the extent that students can study on their own, instruct machines to produce for them outputs, and question outputs so that machines can adjust and improve their outputs to suit and adapt students' needs. For this purpose, as machines perform this task, the study also involved the inclusive digital education theory, which was proposed by the UN Convention of the 2021, which promotes that learners with disabilities have the right to consume education resources and have equal access to education. And therefore the study of AI models for enhancing digital education space in universities, with a case study of selected universities in central Uganda, had to incorporate the concept of enabling students with disabilities and or impairments to utilize AI in their education endeavors. The study was also guided by the constructivist theory proposed by Jean Piaget of the 1950s, which asserts that students can learn on their own, and therefore students can construct their own knowledge with the guidance and facilitation of their lecturers, other than the lecturers becoming the sole seniors of knowledge and the sole experts of knowledge. And therefore, this study in the development of AI adoption model has incorporated the concept of students being able to utilize and adopt AI for constructing their own knowledge and be able to study and get equipped by AI other than solely relying on the lecturer. The study also is guided by the theory of the social constructivist, which was proposed by Levi Zygotsky. Levi Zygotsky proposed the theory of social constructivists, which states that learners cannot learn sufficiently and adequately in a solitary environment, and therefore they need to want to learn by interactions. They need to learn through interactions and groupings so that they can share knowledge and skills to enhance their studies. And therefore, this study considers the AI development model questionnaires, which will be discussed later, capture the interactivity of students, and the conceptual framework also reflects it that students have got to, using AI, have got to interact with each other as they interact with the contents produced by AI. And this was also supported by Lohaman of 2023. The study will be guided by the following objectives: to examine the requirements for AI adoption to enhance digital education space in higher education institutions in central Uganda, to design an AI-enabled AI adoption model to support digital education space in higher education institutions in central Uganda. The study will also be guided by the third objective: to evaluate the AI adoption model to enhance digital education space in higher education institutions in central Uganda. Therefore, after assessing examining the requirements for AI adoption, the study will redesign an enabled AI adoption model, which shall be evaluated in the field. And for that case, the study will be guided by the following objectives. The study will be guided by the following research questions. What are the requirements for AI adoption to enhance digital education space in higher education institutions in central Uganda? What design of AI adoption model is suitable for support digital education space in higher education institutions in Uganda? The study will also be guided by the hypothesis, which will be tested in the field after data collection. The study will test these hypotheses. There are requirements for AI adoption to enhance digital education space in education institutions in Uganda. There is a design for AI adoption to support digital education space in higher education institutions in Uganda, in central Uganda. This study was conceptualized as follows. The independent variable of this study is AI adoption, and the dependent variable is digital education space. When AI adoption is intensified, even digital education space is enhanced. However, when there is no AI adoption model, digital education space is likely to be abused by stakeholders such as students, lecturers, and, and ICT experts. And therefore, to adopt AI in higher education institutions, the study focuses on requirements such as the policy regulatory framework. Another construct is the stakeholder capacity, the ICT infrastructure, and localized content, which were guided and considered from the gaps identified in literature and the gaps that were identified in the analysis the analysis of the existing AI models. These constructs, the digital education space will be measured by studying the auto accessible content. Also will be studied and measured under interactivity of content, collaborative learning, and self-paced learning. Then the third measurement will be the lifelong learning attributes of content. And therefore, the study will, these measurements, these particular measurements were informed by the theories. For example, collaborative learning was informed by the social constructivist theory, interactive learning as well. Auto-accessible content was informed by automation theory and the AI theory. Life self-paced learning was guided by the constructivist theory. The relationship between the dependent and independent variable was is intervened by the institutional collaborations, the partnerships that institutions have with other organizations. These partnerships can enhance digital adoption, AI adoption, or interrupt this relationship if they are not present. And therefore, the finance budget with allocations for AI adoption will be studied, and then the institutional culture as well. This study, according to PEFA, will in the future, I will show in the methodology that the study adopted a design science research design, which requires that the researcher has got to develop an ideal model before setting to the field to collect data. And after collecting that data, that ideal model is informed by data and is adjusted to the real model, which is tested in the field and evaluated before it is communicated. And therefore, this study presumes has an ideal which is guided in line with the conceptual framework that the requirements of AI adoption are likely to be stakeholder capacity, policy, legal regulatory framework, localized content, and ICT infrastructure facilities. And those are broken down, such as stakeholder capacity is broken down into attitudes, ICT literacy skills, prompt engineering skills, content authoring skills, and motivation of users. Similarly, even other requirements which are translated into being constructs presented in the conceptual framework we are also broken down into will also be broken down into sub constructs, which in data analysis will be added together in summation with using SPSS to be able to analyze data adequately. This ideal model and the conceptual framework were informed by gaps in literature, which literature was studied under themes of, of requirements of AI adoption according to various scholars, such as Honor Hotel of 2023, Ribble Arid of 2023, and Jonah Fetch of 2021. And in the analysis of literature, propels that stakeholders, policy, infrastructure, and the content are very key in the adoption of AI in institutions. However, the study noted that as these constructs of stakeholder capacity, policy and regulatory framework, ICT infrastructure, and localized content are to be considered, these are measured against, have been measured against the existing model to I with an intention of identifying gaps that can be filled by this study. The study analyzed the technology adoption model, which emphasized that users have got to accept AI for them to adopt it. And therefore, the study has incorporated in its questionnaires a question that requires assessing whether the stakeholders wish that AI should actually be adopted. However, the technology adoption model did not spell whether policies, ICT infrastructure, and localized content are central in the adoption of AI, which this study has, has laid as a backbone upon which AI should be adopted, and therefore the study will fill the gap left by the technology adoption model, the technology acceptance model, which is the need for policy, ICT, infrastructure, and localized content, which are also supported by Yuan et al. 2022. The study also looked at toy and a technology operators model, which emphasizes that for AI to be adopted or any form of technology, it has got to involve stakeholders in the organizations and also incorporate technology, which this study accepts and agrees to that this is very necessary. However, this model did not spell out how policy and localized content are essential in AI adoption, and those were studied by Fletcher and Seniors of 2021. This study also looked at the without model. It is the unified technology acceptance and utilization theory, which emphasizes that users who are the stakeholders should have a social influence, and their usability and social influence in AI adoption should be taken care of. However, this study overlooked. This study they did not look at policy, ICT, infrastructure, and localized content. The TPAC model also emphasizes that if AI is to be adopted, then the teacher should be considered, including pedagogical knowledge, including pedagogy, which is knowledge, and this classified it as content. Therefore, the TPAC emphasizes that teachers and knowledge are key, who are stakeholders and localized content respectively. And therefore, this study, the model neglects the relevance of ICT infrastructure and policy, which are very central in the context of Uganda, a, a country which is struggling with devices, where learners struggle with access to devices, including their lecturers, and the absence of policy. The study also studied the value acceptance model, which looked at perceived value of content. And thus, according to Orr et al. 2020, that if AI has to be adopted, then it should have to look at which value are people attaching to it. Beyond acceptance, are people also valuing the tool of valuing content that AI is producing? So this study, in its design of questionnaires and the methodology, incorporated the need for people to do perceived value. However, the model did not space out how stakeholders and policy in infrastructure can influence the effectiveness of the AI adoption model to enhance the digital education space. And therefore, this study will cover those gaps. The study also studied other technology adoption models and weighed them versus the intended requirements of, of this study and the pre-perceived requirements of the study to fill their gaps. Others were emphasizing the need to involve institutions and administrators, which this, in our methodology, the study focused on. The historical underpinning of the study. The need for adoption of technology in education started way back in the BCs, and this was initiated by Plato's writing, where Plato wrote a paper emphasizing that future education, this paper was promissory, that future education will need some tools in guiding education, which tools can be classified under technology and which technology can be regrouped under AI technology. And therefore, we can attribute that the history of AI can be traced back up to Plato's proposals. However, the word AI adoption and AI in education was initiated by John McCarthy, who wrote a paper and coined the word artificial intelligence, and that was in the 1956. His paper, according to Ahyo, was more popularized by Alan Turing, who came up with the Turing test, which assumed that what actually makes machines to think. How do machines think? Can machines think? Those were questions which were posted by Alan Turing. Can machines think? And therefore, scholars have come up with expert machines that can operate on their own and can produce work and make decisions. And those in the 1970s and 1980s, these expert machines had started taking shape. However, later on, we see the existence of online learning platforms which utilize the expert technology and tend to adopt some of the concepts of artificial intelligence but at a low stage, and therefore education institutions are adopting these, according to Nsovga of 2022. Later on, we see that the integration of personalized learning experiences are being driven by educational technology, which blends inclusivity in education, which is categorized under edutech in according to Cray 2021. When COVID-19 advanced in Uganda and affected the world generally, the platforms of digital learning increased their importance, and therefore experts of ICT and architects of ICT came up with new ways of designing digital platforms to automate them so that they can learn what learners need and modify them, adapt them to the needs of learners, which incorporated the need for intensifying the effectiveness of AI, and therefore the algorithms of AI design were modified and improved to create more importance of AI in the current times. In the post-COVID era where we are, according to a bull of 2022, there are several AI tools that have come onto the market, including AI tools such as Meta AI, according to Abul, Even Google has adjusted its search engines to adopt an AI tool that analyzes instructions and commands of, of users so that summarizing data from their searches is made swifter and easy. These AI tools they are educational tools such as generative AI, which has become more prominent. And according to Obul and Rekio of 2020, Rekio of 2021, the AI tools are becoming much more prevalent in our communities that users such as students and teachers and lecturers are actually relying on them to author content, set questions of examinations, answer the questions of examinations, including coursework and other assignments. And then the study is also rooted in philosophy, the philosophy of constructivism, which emphasizes learners' autonomy and ability to personalize learning. This study has incorporated that. The study also relies on the philosophy of humanism as people utilize AI according to Senge and Ronzu. As people utilize AI, they may lose their humanism and lose their creativity and culture. And therefore, this study looks at how culture of Ugandans can be protected, including their creativity, while using artificial intelligence. And this is will be an area of concern while collecting data, and also it will be evaluated after data has been analyzed. It also looks at technological determinism, which looks at and how AI influences or determines the practices and the students' agency, reshaping their traditional pedagogy to newer and technological driven pedagogies. It also looks at the utilitarian theory, the utilitarian philosophy, which is utilitarianism, which evaluates AI tools based on their capacity to enhance learning experiences. The research methodology. This study will be guided by the following methodology in collecting data, in analyzing data, and presenting the data. The research paradigm. The study took pragmatism, will take pragmatism as the research paradigm, and it will adopt this paradigm because the paradigm allows practical processes that can initiate solutions, real solutions in the community. Why? Because AI is already being used and practiced in our communities. Therefore, the pragmatism research paradigm is suitable for such a study which investigates occurrences which are already in practice. And therefore, to adopt this paradigm, the study is integrating elements of both positivism and interpretivism. In this very line, The study will adopt a mixed research approach which integrates both quantitative and qualitative approaches. And to integrate quantitative and qualitative approaches, the study will utilize explanatory sequential, where quantitative data will be presented and then explained by qualitative data. And that was studied, and taking an example of how John Ebon et al. 2020 used the the mixed research approach. In terms of the research design, the study will adopt design science research design. Design science research design will be adopted because it enables the researcher, according to Prefer of 2006, that the researcher has got to identify the problem, set a preposition, a presumed solution, set a solution which is still hypothesized solution, and then the researcher has got to collect data, test the solution in form of a model. After testing, it is evaluated and later on communicated. This is represented in this diagram. The problem is low and inadequate adoption of AI, and the objective solution. The objective of the solution is to design an enabled AI adoption model for higher education institutions. Then also, data is going to be collected from the field to inform each of the constructs, which will form a draft model which has got to be tested back in the field. And then afterwards, the model will be more informed, and later on the tested model will be evaluated by experts, questioned by experts, and a modification of this model will be done according to the expert views before it is communicated. The study will utilize simple random sampling while selecting students, and therefore in the selection of students, the students will be those who are on bachelor's and in their third year, who have used AI and have sufficient exposure to university resources. And therefore, purposive sampling will be used for faculty heads and and school administrators. Data will be collected using questionnaires, using interviews, and therefore the questionnaires will be closed-ended questionnaires with a record of 5. And then the interviews will be face-to-face interviews with open-ended questions. To analyze the data, the study will analyze the two sets of data. data collected using the approach of quantitative approach, coming from that will be generated from questionnaires, will be analyzed quantitatively using descriptive statistics of mean and standard deviation, and the mean and the standard deviation of the IV, the independent variable, with the mean and standard deviation of the dependent variables will be correlated using Pearson correlation coefficient. Using Pearson correlation coefficient to get the correlation coefficient R, which will explain the direction of the relationship and also its strength. However, this one will also look at the significance, P, the P value of the relationship, to recategorize and elevate some of the elements or some of the requirements in the AI model, those that are significant and have a positive and strong correlation will be elevated in the model, and those that have a weak positive correlation will come at the bottom, and those that have no correlation will be eliminated from the model. To explain the models and explain the relevance of these requirements, data from the interviews will be quoted to explain the quantitative data using explanatory sequential. Therefore, qualitative data will be analyzed using thematic analysis, where premises from interviews will be classified under themes and analyzed under common themes. The study sample size, the study will use the sample size presented here below. This sample size table is informed by a formula, a sample size determination formula, which is used here as Slovens of 1967. Which is going to involve e-learning officers because they have exposure on e-learning ICTs and how to implement the e-learning policies, where if those e-learning policies are established in those institutions. Lecturers as users, according to literature review, users such as lecturers and students were important to be included in the study. However, it was also important to include faculty heads and school heads because they have unique knowledge about how to administer and how to implement AI requirements in their universities, and therefore they were important to be included in here. The statistics from presented in here consider students who are in year 3, and are pursuing bachelor's degrees, particularly in the School of Education, in the all faculties of education. According to the Slovens formula of 1967, therefore the study will involve 277 quantitative samples, those who receive questionnaires, and 30 qualitative samples, and the 30 were informed by Creswell and Creswell of 2014. Thank you, members, for the attention. I wish you well and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Wilber Ssebuyungo Kivekayunga.